Good afternoon. I'm Colette Watson, and this is Free Press Live, brought to you by Free Press, a nonprofit, nonpartisan media reform advocacy organization. Free Press Live is your weekly source for updates and live discussion of what's happening in the world of communications rights. Learn more about our work at freepress.net. So thank you for watching today, and let us know in the comments here on Facebook or YouTube where you're tuning in from and any questions you have about today's topic. Today, Bianca Tilek joins us to talk about a major new law in Connecticut that will make phone calling services free for incarcerated people and their families. But first, a few news updates. Welcome to Free Press Live. In today's news updates from NewYorkTimes.com, President Biden signed legislation on last Thursday to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, enshrining June 19th as the national day to commemorate the day in 1865 when formerly enslaved people in Texas found out that the Emancipation Proclamation had been issued 2 years earlier. This sparked public celebrations and efforts at family reunification. Last week's legislation went into effect immediately, making Friday's observance the first federal Juneteenth holiday. From MetroTimes.com, Democratic lawmakers on Tuesday reintroduced legislation that would ban facial recognition technology on the federal level and withhold money from state and local police departments that continue to use it. The Facial Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act was introduced in the U.S. House and Senate. Representative Rashida Tlaib, whose legislative sponsor, said in a statement, "We cannot allow racist, faulty facial recognition technology to continue to be used in the surveillance and criminalization of Black and Brown communities." Over at our home, freepress.net, Friday, the Media 2070 Project delivered a petition to 3,000 newsrooms across the country, calling on those news outlets to dismantle anti-Black racism in the media, trust Black journalists, and care for Black communities. In a statement from project director Alicia Bell, quote, "News outlets frequently malign or ignore Black communities who are overrepresented in coverage of crime and poverty. And within newsrooms, Black journalists are frequently treated with mistrust, a dynamic that has prompted too many talented reporters to leave the field. For all of these reasons, Media 2070 is calling on newsrooms to sign our pledge. And you can learn more at media2070.org. From Cyberscoop, a recent study from global human rights group Avaz shows that Facebook is still struggling to rein in COVID-19 misinformation in Spanish. The group examined top-performing posts on Instagram promoting a debunked viral claim that coronavirus will make patients' arms magnetic because it contains metals or possibly a microchip. Of the 30 posts in Spanish, only one had received a fact-checking label, while roughly half of the 47 high-performing English language posts had received a fact-check label. Quote, "These types of findings aren't surprising," said Carmen Scarrato, who's senior policy counsel here at Free Press. "It's disappointing because we have seen from Facebook, in particular, incompetent oversight when it comes to Spanish language on their platform and allowing disinformation to spread to Latinx communities." And over at thehill.com, more than 50 advocacy groups on last Monday sent a letter to President Biden urging him to nominate a candidate to fill an open seat on the Federal Communications Commission. In the letter, the group said, quote, "This is all the more urgent given the fact poor families and people of color are disproportionately disconnected from high-speed internet access, compounding grave inequalities that were made worse during the pandemic." And you can learn more about these fights and many others at freepress.net. Today, though, we're discussing legislation recently signed into law in Connecticut that allows all incarcerated adults and juveniles a minimum of 90 minutes per day of free phone calls. Connecticut joins several jurisdictions nationwide that have taken steps to make prison and jail phone calls free. Joining us to discuss is Bianca Tilek of Worth Rises, a national organization that is working to dismantle the prison industry and end the exploitation of those it targets. Bianca, it's an honor to have you with us here today. Welcome.
Hi, Colette. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, our pleasure. I want to jump right in, Bianca. What just happened in Connecticut and why is it a big deal?
Absolutely. So Connecticut just became the first state in the nation to make phone calls out of its prison system entirely free. And I should correct myself, not just phone calls, but all communication. That means video calls, electronic messaging that have recently been introduced into facilities there in Connecticut and other places. In Connecticut will now be entirely free to families with loved ones who are incarcerated and trying to stay connected to their loved ones who are incarcerated. That bill also now prevents technology from replacing in-person visits, which has been an issue around the nation for a few years now, with video calls often replacing in-person visits. Connecticut, that is now blocked by law. And as you noted, it will include a threshold, a minimum threshold of 90 minutes per day that every incarcerated person must be afforded. And so it's a huge, huge, huge victory for prison phone justice. Up until now, we have been seeing many wins, but all on the city level and county level. And this is now the first state.
Thank you, Bianca. So I can imagine how much work has gone into, the victories that you mentioned on the city level, and now having this amazing legislation be signed into law at the state level. Would you tell us how did we get to this point? Maybe take us inside the campaigning and advocacy.
Absolutely. So we actually introduced this bill for the first time in 2019. But what's important to note is that families have been fighting for prison phone justice for many, many years. In fact, we work with Free Press sometimes at the federal level with things related to the FCC. But there is a grandmother, Martha Wright Reed, who has been fighting for this, had been fighting before she passed away for over a decade in order to be able to speak to her son. And so this is not a new fight. The industry has existed for quite some time. But we are starting to really, really see wins happen now. And so in 2018 is when we saw New York City pass the first piece of legislation to make phone calls free in their city jail system. San Francisco followed in 2019. And in 2019, as I noted, was also when we introduced this legislation for the first time and began our campaign to connect families in Connecticut in 2019. Unfortunately, in that same year, I should say that Securus, the corporation that was making, they were making $5 million a year. The state was making, actually over $5 million, almost $6 million a year. The state was making another $7 million a year. And so there's this huge grab right out of communities, lobbied against our bill in 2019. And we didn't, by the time we learned that they had been lobbying against our bill, it was only about 2 weeks left of session. And it was very difficult for us to bounce back from that. But we had a commitment from leadership that they would address this in the next session. Fortunately, 2020, we all know, was taken over by the pandemic. And in fact, in Connecticut, ended up cutting their session short, very short, which means not a whole lot of legislation got done in 2020. So that really brought us to 2021 as the first full session where we could argue for legislation. And we came back. We were really, really happy to see the caucus, the legislature hold its promise and get this done.
Thank you for taking us inside this process. It's amazing to hear about how family advocates and so many people came together. And I thought that I heard that also some incarcerated folks actually took part in the advocacy as well.
Yeah, very important. Thank you for that. So, that was kind of the journey. But in terms of, who was involved, there was a lot of us, right? And most importantly, a lot of local folks there in Connecticut, and in particular, directly impacted community members, both in the community and inside. And so, we had on our steering committee co-director of the Connecticut Bail Fund, who was also formerly incarcerated father. We had a mother whose son was incarcerated for 14 years, and others. And they, I think bringing that community in was a critical part of us getting to this finish line. I remember a very critical moment in the campaign was the public hearing. Everybody knows when you have a piece of legislation and you're, hoping to move it, you need to get a public hearing. And our public hearing ended up being 12 hours. We did a joint public hearing with another campaign, the Stop Solitary campaign in Connecticut, and our friends over there. And together we had a really beautiful synergy between our campaigns, us showing support for the Stop Solitary fight, the Stop Solitary Coalition showing support for the Connect Families Coalition and our bill. And together we brought out dozens, really, really big numbers of directly impacted folks, both who are formerly incarcerated and told their own stories of being disconnected from their families, to mothers and sisters and children of folks who are incarcerated who talked about how the cost weighed on them. We also recorded and collected testimony from inside, and specifically both written testimony, but also over a hotline with the help of the Connecticut Bail Fund, collected not live, but recorded testimony that we then played live during the hearing through volunteers. Really, hoping to bring the voices of those inside into this fight.
That sounds like an amazing campaign, Bianca. I think that for folks watching who may not be familiar with this issue, I want to ask you about beyond Connecticut, kind of why are prison phone calls and jail phone calls so expensive? What are the forces that have been in the way of families being able to connect? And before you answer that, I do want to invite the folks watching Free Press Live here today to ask any questions that you might have for Bianca in the comments, and we will be able to answer those live here on the stream. But Bianca, why is this issue so important? Why are calls so expensive?
Sure. So calls, I think, like what people often don't know, right, is that a call from prison or jail can run as much as $1 a minute. It's incredibly expensive. And that is coming down from actually some even higher rates. Over $25 for a simple 15-minute phone call just up to a year ago. And so, it is an excessive cost. Why is it excessive? Because it's a huge industry. This is a $1.4 billion industry. 90% of that industry is made up by just 3 corporations, 80% by just 2. And so, there is a lot of market concentration that allows them in large part to do what they want to do. And in most cases, that's obviously charge exorbitant rates to families who have no other choice but to use their services, because in a particular jail, you must use whatever phone provider has been chosen by your agency. And one thing that's important to know is that those agencies don't choose those contracts based on the best service providers, or who provides, for example, the best rates. No, actually, quite to the contrary. Prisons and jails are in profit sharing agreements with these corporations, which means they share in the wealth. They collect a kickback, what they like to refer to as a commission, off of the cost of a call. So all these things mount up in addition to fees and taxes and all these to create a really, really, really expensive system that is bringing 1 in 3 families into debt who are trying to stay connected with a loved one. 87% of those carrying that debt are women, and disproportionately and largely women of color. So, I often describe this issue as not just a criminal justice issue, but also an economic issue, economic justice issue, gender justice issue, all sort of coming together in a way that really, really harms and decimates our communities, separates our families, traumatizes our children, and this work is, seeking to undo that.
So you're saying that that jails and prisons collect a commission on phone calling services.
Exactly. I think it's really surprising for many people to find out that it's not just these, very predatory and greedy corporations, but it's also this partnership with state and local agencies where they, take a piece of the pie.
Wow. And tell us a little bit, you touched on this, but tell us a little bit more about the impact on these families and on communities when families aren't able to connect and stay in touch with their loved ones who are incarcerated.
Yeah, well, I always kick that question back, right? It's like, well, what does it mean to you to have a call with your child or your mother or your sister, right? Your husband, whoever it might be. What does it mean to be connected to that person? What does it mean on the other side to not be able to contact them, right? And we know that it means everything. In fact, there was a study done in San Francisco with our partners during that campaign, and that was actually the most common response when asked people inside, when asked about, what a phone call means. People inside most often responded, it means everything. Because you are separated from your family in every other respect, from people who care about you, from your support system, from everything you know. And, all you have is a phone call. And so it's incredibly important to the unity and sanctity of family. It is also incredibly important to the way in which we bring people home. I think people fail to think about the fact that, folks who are inside, 95% of them will come home to our communities. And if you want folks to come home and be successful, then it's prudent that they're actually connected to the community that they're coming home to. People who have communication with their loved ones are more likely to reenter successfully. They're more likely to have housing when they come home, and we know that homelessness is such a huge issue for people who are returning from prison or jail. They're more likely to have employment. They're more likely to have simple supports that put food on the table, right? They're connected to their children. They're connected to their community. They're more eager to come home because they're connected to their communities. And so, for all those reasons, it helps communities thrive, and it also protects public safety in ensuring people don't return to prison. So, it's the kind of policy that really is a win-win-win for everybody.
And it seems like the state of Connecticut agrees, Bianca. Just for folks who may just be tuning in, you're watching Free Press Live, and we're talking about the signage of new legislation in Connecticut, now law, that is making phone calling services free for incarcerated folks in that state. So Bianca, you talked a little bit about the importance of staying connected for incarcerated folks and their families and communities. I want to ask you, what are some of the other places that are considering measures like this, and where do we go from here?
Sure, super important. So we're really excited that there is a growing movement around prison phone justice. I mean, as I mentioned at the top, right, Connecticut is already joining a series of jurisdictions, including New York, San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, in making phone calls free. And in fact, San Diego and Los Angeles made that decision this year. In the last 2 months, we've seen huge momentum on prison phone justice. And we know that, coming up right behind Connecticut is Massachusetts, that has bills currently introduced ready to make phone calls free. New York State also has introduced legislation. There's organizing happening in Miami, in Michigan, in Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. And, there's a number of other agencies that are also talking about this behind closed doors. And so, we're really seeing some serious momentum. And with every win, we see, a few more campaigns pop up. And importantly, we also see them win faster. And so that's our hope here.
Incredible. And I know that there are many people who share that hope and appreciate all of the progress that's been made. We have in the comments here a comment from Pam Lanier Hardiman, who says, being the mother of a former inmate, this is absolutely wonderful. I spent a fortune so that I could talk with him daily. And a number of emojis there to express, Bianca, the appreciation for everyone, for you and everyone involved in this fight for phone justice. We do have one question, Bianca, if you don't mind, that I'd love to queue up. So Jeffrey asks, what can we as supporters of your work do to convince other states to pass legislation similar to Connecticut? How likely is it that the U.S. Congress would pass this type of legislation? And thank you for that question, Jeffrey. I'm sorry, Bianca, go ahead.
No worries. Great question, Jeffrey. And I think, as I was kind of saying there a second ago, every single one of these wins builds on the last, right? And so, the most common, for example, when we put this on social media, on Twitter, the most common retweet was people retweeting it and tagging their legislators, their governors, and saying, can we do this in Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Arizona, right? And the list goes on. And, we do want to see it happen in all those areas. And so, what do we need? We need a community that's ready to fight, that has a vested interest in this, directly impacted members who know what it's all worth. And we need either legislative or executive elected official champions. We need people who are willing to say, this is something I want to fight for. And we had some incredible legislative champions in Connecticut, and Representative Josh Elliott, and Senator Gary Winfield, and Representative Steve Staffstrom, and Senator Martin Looney. We really had people who wanted to see this happen, because it wasn't always easy, as you can expect. And when different folks wanted to gut our bill, there needed to be legislators in those rooms that said no, and said, we're not budging, we're not negotiating, this is what we want, and we're going to protect this. And I think it's important for people to know that, because we actually got everything we wanted in our legislation. We compromised nothing. So, that's what I'll say about getting this done in other states. And, we're always happy to support, to provide technical support, on the ground support, whatever that takes. On the congressional level, just to say really quickly, there is legislation, the Martha Wright Reed bills, both in Senate and in the House, that are looking to expand FCC's authority to regulate the cost of calls. Unfortunately, Congress does not really have the authority to tell states what to do at the state level. But or not necessarily Congress, but federal, the FCC, and then also what the federal system can say and do. But Congress can and does have power over the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which has in fact had free phone calls since the pandemic started. The question is whether or not that policy will survive.
I see. So it's definitely incumbent on all of us to make sure that our elected officials are on the right side of this issue, I think, as we come into contact with those folks. Bianca, I know that we could talk to you about this all day, but you are on the move and we are appreciative of your time. So before we go, I do want to let folks know that you're watching Free Press Live, and our guest today is Bianca Tilek, who's with Worth Rises. And if you don't mind, before we go, just tell us a little bit about Worth Rises and what's next. And we want people to know that how they can connect with you.
Absolutely. So, first, thank you, obviously, Free Press, for having me on. You can definitely go to our website to learn more about our work. .org, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram to keep up with all the work that we're doing, as well as, in this general area at Worth Rises. And, we just focused on the industry that has been built around prisons and jails and dismantling that industry, because we don't think that any entity or individual should depend on human caging or control for their wealth, operation, or livelihood. And so, just in closing, we have another campaign we just launched this Juneteenth called End the Exception. It is a federal campaign to end the exception in the 13th Amendment that allows for slavery as punishment for a crime. And so we're addressing that. We introduced, with the help of Senator Merkley and Representative Nikema Williams in Congress, a new amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would end this exception. And so we encourage everyone to go to www.endtheexception.com to learn more about the campaign and to take action.
Thank you for that, Bianca. We're very appreciative. So glad that we could have you on Free Press Live today. And as Bianca just shared, please do make sure that you visit endtheexception.com. We'll make sure that that link is available in the comments. And we'll also take time to address some of the questions we couldn't get to today here on Free Press Live. Bianca, I know you've worked closely with certain folks at Free Press and many, many other places. And so probably our colleague Leo, who folks may remember from past episodes of Free Press Live, will tag in there in the comments to answer some of those questions. So thank you again, Bianca. And please stay safe and well as you continue.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me. And thank you always, Free Press, for your amazing partnership. Have a great one.
You too, our pleasure. And to everyone watching, thank you for tuning in today to Free Press Live, and every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern here on Facebook and YouTube. If you have questions for us, please do continue the conversation in the comments. We will answer. And until next time, please follow us at Free Press on Twitter, on Instagram, and of course on Facebook. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you next Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern for Free Press Live.